Okay. It's okay. My voice is okay. Okay. So my voice is okay. My glasses is almost okay. And dear colleagues, good morning. Bonjour. I'm honored to be here today. I'm honored to be able to speak about one of my passions. And so I have to thank Professor Fred for this opportunity and the invitation. Based on the title of my presentation, I will try to speak about the relationship between genius and memory, between genius and sleep, using two famous authors' cases. Before starting, I present myself. My name is Antonio, and my surname is one of the most difficult notions you have to understand and remember, because my surname is Perciaccante, but don't worry, because my friends and my wife and my sons call me Perci. In Italian it's Perci, not Percy, to simplify. I'm not an expert in literature or in sleep or in memory, but I'm an Italian doctor working in internal medicine and diabetology. I'm passionate about history of medicine, about medical humanities and paleopathography. I'm working in at Goriza's hospital, and okay. Goriza is a little city northeast of Italy, near Venice, and very close to Slovenia. Indeed, there is a place that Goriza shares with Nova Gorica in Slovenia. Now I can start my presentation with a question, a simple question for you. If I say memory and genius, which famous people come to mind? It's simple. Proust. Marcel Proust. So, you can understand that I'm terrorized to speak about Proust in Paris. It's the same sensation I had when I spoke about Dante Alighieri in Florence. It was almost dangerous. The relationship between genius and memory in Marcel Proust is well known. In his masterpiece, In Search of Lost Time, there are over 1,200 allusions to several aspects of memory, mainly on involuntary memory. The main source inspired Marcel Proust was the French philosopher Henri-Louis Bergson. Bergson was the author of the book Matter and Memory, and he replaced the concept of chronological time with internal time, based on the memory's action. Bergson considered true memory not the voluntary act of remembrance, but acting through intuition. But today, I will try to analyze the relationship between genius and memory in Marcel Proust from a different point of view, a pathographic point of view. As I love to say, Marcel Proust breathes medicine since his birth. This man was the father of Marcel, Adrien Proust. Adrien Proust was a famous hygienist and epidemiologist, professor at the University of Paris. He was founder of the International Office of Hygiene, which was the precursor of the actual World Health Organization. And he was author of the book, The Hygiene of the Neurasthenic. And it is important for this presentation. As you can see in this picture, the little genius Marcel is together with Robert Proust. Robert Proust was the brother of Marcel Proust, and he was a urologist and gynecologist. So the figures of his father and his brother were very important for Marcel's health history. Indeed, they were friends of the father of the neurology and his legacy. This man is the famous Jean-Martin Charcot, the father of neurology. A little bit of pathography of Marcel Proust. The main illnesses Marcel suffered from were bronchial asthma and insomnia. Aged 9, Marcel had the first asthma attack. Marcel's asthma improved during his adolescence, and later he returned with more frequent and serious attacks. These illnesses influenced his literary genius. Indeed, due to his asthma attacks, Marcel met Dr. Merkelen. Dr. Merkelen said that Marcel's asthma was due to a nervous habitus. Indeed, at that time, asthma was considered a nervous disorder, included in the broad clinical spectrum of so-called neurasthenia. Neurasthenia was first described in the USA, and the neurologist George Miller Beard identified a clinical condition characterized by more somatic and mental symptoms. At the time of Marcel's life, there was a flourishing of scientific literature on neurasthenia, and Adrien Proust as well published a book titled The Hygiene of the Neurasthenic. In this book, Adrien Proust described the typical personality of neurasthenic people. Insecure personality, inability to make decisions, dependence on parents. This was the perfect portrait of his son Marcel. So Marcel Proust was labeled as a neurasthenic patient. And this started his long journey through neurology. Indeed, Marcel met many famous neurologists. He met Edouard Brissot. Brissot inspired the character of Dr. de Boulbon in Proust's novel In Search of Lost Time. Marcel met Joseph Jules Dejerin. And finally, the famous Joseph Babinski. Babinski cared for Proust's mother when she had a stroke, and Marcel consulted Babinski for his fear of developing aphasia. Moreover, Babinski was one of the last doctors examined Marcel a few days before his death. But today I want to focus your attention, on another meeting Marcel Proust had. The meeting between Marcel Proust and the neurologist Paul Solier. On December 6, 1905, 8 years before the publication of In Search of the Lost Time, Marcel Proust entered in Solier's clinic in Boulogne-Billancourt to follow an isolation cure to improve his asthma and to reset his totally desynchronized sleep-wakefulness. Indeed, Paul Solier applied isolation therapy to treat hysteria and neurasthenia. And this isolation therapy consisted of the patient was admitted to hospital and isolated from his usual social environment. The patient may be in contact only with his physician. A psychological regression was supposed to be triggered by confinement to bed for at least 1 week, and the aim was to produce a dependence of the patient upon his physician. Solier used involuntary memory to trigger experiencing in order to obtain a new mental and affective balance in his patients. But who was Paul Solier? Paul Solier was one of Charcot's disciples. He was one of the first neuropsychologists. He was famous for to have developed environmental cognitive therapies, and he was an expert in hysteria and memory. Indeed, he studied memory in depth and used his knowledge to provoke emotional surges of involuntary memory in his patients, and published several books about this argument. He was one of the major precursors of the modern cognitive neurology, studied several aspects of the memory, but today we are interested in involuntary memory. Although the phenomenon of involuntary surge was already known by Aristotle, Voltaire, Diderot, Sollier was the first to analyze the surge in such detail in order to use it during a specific therapy for his patients. He transformed Ribot's idea from forgetting is the condition of memory into the passage from the conscious to the unconscious, with the reverse phenomenon during the reviviscence. In his book, Le problème de la mémoire, Sollier said, a memory is an image which reproduces a past impression. Experiencing is something more. It is not only the appearance of an image into the field of consciousness, but this appearance is so clear and is accompanied by such precise and intense reproduction of the state of personality of the subject at the time of the initial impression. Moreover, Sollier linked involuntary memory with affective and emotional factors. He said, I'm feeling a violent emotion during an accident which I have witnessed. And this emotional state triggers in me the revival of memories, of facts, which bear no relationship to the actual accident, but have determined in me a similar emotional state. This phenomenon was reported by Marcel Proust in one of the most famous extracts of his masterpiece In Search of Lost Time, the episode of La Petite Madeleine. So it's very likely that Marcel Proust was fascinated by Paul Sollier and his studies on the memory, mainly involuntary memory. It may have influenced his literary genius. Unfortunately, very little is known about the specific development of Proust's therapy, because Sollier's archives have not entirely recovered, and Proust scarcely mentioned Sollier and the therapy in his correspondence. Indeed, in his rare accounts of his stay in the sanatorium, Proust complained about the inefficacy of treatment he called psychotherapy, and we can understand this because they searched to treat asthma with psychotherapy. But the therapy of Marcel Proust is also pharmacological therapy: caffeine, epinephrine, morphine, barbiturates, etc. We can understand that this therapy had a negative effect. Indeed, Marcel developed a chronic obstructive pulmonary disease with frequent acute exacerbation and pneumonias. His insomnia worsened, his psychological health worsened, and Marcel developed a distrust in doctors and medicine. About Marcel Proust's insomnia, it's difficult to perform an accurate analysis of his insomnia. Insomnia was present in Marcel Proust since childhood, as reported in some excerpt from Swan's Way. The presence of insomnia since childhood and the lack of the possible external causes led to consider the diagnosis of idiopathic insomnia. Idiopathic insomnia usually occurs nightly and includes short sleeping times, numerous and unexplained nighttime awakenings. The predisposing and perpetuating factors of Marcel's insomnia were his anxiety and depression. And further factors affecting Marcel's quality of sleep were asthma attacks and pharmacological treatment, mainly caffeine and adrenaline. In November 1922, Marcel Proust suffered from a further episode of pneumonia. He refused any treatment, and on November 18, aged 51 years, the genius died. In conclusion, we can hypothesize that illnesses strongly influenced both life and literary opera of Marcel Proust. References to his insomnia and several aspects of the memory, mainly involuntary memory, are reported in his masterpiece In Search of Lost Time. And although he doesn't talk about it, during his stay in Paul Sollier's clinic, Marcel Proust directly experienced the effects of the surges of involuntary memory on himself, and I'm certain that this experience influenced his literary genius. Now, the second part of my presentation. Sorry, I have to thank my little son for this gift. If I say sleep and genius, which famous people comes to mind? Franz Kafka. A very short biography of Kafka. He was born in Prague into a German Jewish family. He lived in ghetto. His father ruled the family with great authority, as Kafka himself described in his diaries. He earned his degree in law and started to work with the public office. And in those years, he began to suffer from insomnia and pulmonary tuberculosis. Indeed, he spent some time in a sanatorium in Italy, in Riva del Garda. And he was thinking of committing suicide. And in 1917, pulmonary tuberculosis was clearly evident, and he was hospitalized in a sanatorium in Merano, in Italy. Here he began an epistolary relationship with Milena Jessenska. This correspondence is very, very important because it is a precious source of information regarding Kafka's state of mental and physical health. His anxiety, his depression, and his self-destructive manias clearly emerge. In February 1924, his physical health worsened. He was hospitalized in a clinic of Professor Hayek in Vienna and was diagnosed with tubercular laryngeal infiltration. Professor Hoffmann attempted an alcoholization of the superior laryngeal nerve, but Franz Kafka died. The main illnesses Kafka suffered from were tuberculosis, mental disease, and insomnia. My colleague and I, really my wife and I, hypothesized that mental disease is compatible with the diagnosis of a borderline personality disorder with co-occurring anxiety and depression. But only mental disease and insomnia and not tuberculosis influenced his literary activity. Franz Kafka himself said, "I'm mentally handicapped. The lung disease is none other than an overflow of the mental disease." Kafka and his insomnia. From letters to Milena, we can see that Kafka suffered from insomnia. And it's difficult to classify his insomnia. To identify the possible causes of Kafka's insomnia, we have to look at his lifestyle and the mental disorders. He deliberately did most of his literary work at night time. He had an anxious personality, and in his diaries, Kafka seems to be searching for the cause of his insomnia. He wrote, "My insomnia only conceals a great fear of death. Perhaps I am afraid that the soul, which in sleep leaves me, will not be able to return." So, Kafka's hyperarousal, his anxiety, and his tendency to worry excessively about sleep seems to suggest that the writer could have suffered from a psychophysiological insomnia. Kafka had a complex, obsessive, and conflicting relationship with sleep. Indeed, he called the night my old enemy. He knew the importance of sleep. The sleep is the most innocent creature there is, and the sleepless man the most guilty. Kafka considered insomnia as a rejection of the natural, but at some time he seems to be afraid of sleep because it represents an area where the consciousness is lost. Although he knew the importance of sleep, he seems to be resigned to accept his insomnia. He said, "When sleep passes over me in the night, I know where it is headed and accept this." Insomnia may be considered as a literary method for Franz Kafka. Indeed, his insomnia allows Kafka to write and take refuge in literature. However, it is not sufficient to placate his demons. In a letter to Milena Jesenska, Kafka tries to explain the relationship between sleep and writing. He said, "Whenever I write, sleep is out of question, both before and after. When I don't write, I at least get a few hours of shallow sleep. When I don't write, I'm tired, sad, heavy. When I do write, I'm torn by fear and anxiety." Kafka deliberately writes at nighttime because, due to his work at office and due to his physical illness, tuberculosis, he needs to rest. But mainly because he is convinced that only at night time he has access to otherwise inaccessible thoughts. In his diaries, Kafka wrote that at night easily everything can be said, as if a great fire has been prepared for all these things, in which the strangest thoughts emerge and again disappear. And moreover, he adds, "All I possess are certain power which, at a depth almost inaccessible at the normal condition, shape themselves into literature." But what are these otherwise inaccessible thoughts? And what are these powers Kafka has? His friend Max Brod seems to be help us. In a letter he wrote, "Franz in the afternoon is tired and only the night remains for the mass of visions." And Kafka himself confirmed these visions. He said that he was in the bed with closed eyes and unbearable visions. But what are these visions? And what is their origin? It's difficult to understand the real origin of Kafka's visions. However, the writer himself seems to help us, and in his diaries he stated, "It was the power of my dreams, shining forth into wakefulness even before I fall asleep, which didn't let me sleep." Kafka's description seems compatible with the description of an hypnagogical hallucination. You know that hypnagogical hallucination is a form of parasomnia characterized by vivid hallucination just before falling asleep. So, sleep quality disorders adversely affected Kafka's quality of life, but at the same time, they fed his literary genius. Now, before I finish, only 5 minutes to try to read one of the most famous literary works by Franz Kafka in a different light, Metamorphosis. All we know that the protagonist is Grigor Samsa, and he suddenly finds himself transformed into a monstrous bug. Despite rejection by his family, friends, colleagues, and the outside world, Gregor accepts his new condition. The story finishes with Gregor dying of inanition, and all we agree that this short story, is considered a metaphor of social alienation. But today I will try to read the story in a different way, based on the relationship between Kafka and sleep. First, in a letter to Felis Bauer, Kafka writes that this story occurred to me in bed, in my misery, and now troubles me and demands to be written. So the idea to write Metamorphosis occurred when Kafka is in the bed. Maybe he had a further pedagogical hallucination. I don't know. The second sleep appears to be both the cause and the solution of Gregor's transformation and alienation. Indeed, the story starts as follows. One morning, as Gregor Samsa was waking up from anxious dreams, he discovered that in bed he had been changed into a monstrous verminous bag. So the transformation of Gregor occurred after a night characterized by anxious dreams. So after a night characterized by a poor quality of sleep. At the same time, Gregor thinks that a restful sleep may be the solution of his problem. Indeed, he said, "Why don't I keep sleeping for a little while longer and forget all this foolishness?" But this was impossible because he was used to sleeping on his right side, and in his new state, he couldn't get himself into this position. Third, Gregor emphasized the importance of a restful sleep. He said, "This getting up early makes a man quite idiotic. A man must have his sleep." So, from this excerpt, we can gather that sleep had a pivotal role in this short story, had a pivotal role in Gregor's transformation. It seems to be both the cause and the possible solution of his transformation alienation. Gregor's inability to sleep, maybe a metaphor of insomnia, perpetuates his dehumanization and makes the solution impossible. So, in conclusion, the short story Metamorphosis may represent a metaphor of the importance of a restful sleep and of the negative effects sleep disorder may have on mental and physical health. Thank you for your kind attention, and mainly, I hope you understood my English, because after I finish, this is my second little drama. First little drama is surname, second little drama is the language. Because I'm Italian, the word says you can't speak English very well. But at some time, because I was born in South Italy, Italians say you can speak Italian very well. Thank you.